an arcade, a demonic entity, and an in-game game with hidden lore elements. No, this isn't another Five Nights at Freddy's game, but Janitor Bleeds, which comes to the Steam store today, April 7th, 2022, for the price of $12.99, with a discount of $3 for the first 7 days. But before I begin this review, this key was obtained from the developer for review purposes. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? You play as a random stranger who finds himself stranded on the road to begin the game. And if you're like me, you'll then take 15 minutes trying to find the flashlight, because apparently I have the sight of Velma from Scooby-Doo when she loses her glasses. After finally finding it, you then follow a path to a mysterious abandoned arcade and enter looking for help, despite every piece of horror media telling you that you should probably keep walking. Let's be clear from the top of this review. Janitor Bleeds doesn't do anything special or unique in the indie horror genre. The basic formula is that you follow a semi-linear path with small objectives that change constantly. Many of them will bring you to an arcade game called Janitor. This arcade game has Atari 2600-like graphics and is a game that you can play in the game that ends up manipulating the world around you. This, unfortunately, will end up getting the attention of the so-called entity, a creature that will stalk you and attempt to kill you if it gets its hands on you. Your job is to keep making progress, keep playing the Janitor arcade games to find the solution to whatever's hunting you, and not to get killed in the process. The atmosphere of the game is what you'd expect from a small indie horror game, but it's done competently here. The rundown nature of this arcade is believable, while having assets modified with those arcade cabinets to make them feel unique to this world, but obviously focusing on the titular arcade game. Now, while the assets aren't the highest of quality, they do enough to at least get you a little lost in potential environmental storytelling with their detail. I say potential because if you're like me, you'll ask questions, and some of them don't have good answers for the level design here. Like how the default room set has arcade games all over the place, but there's no real theme. It just sort of feels placed everywhere with no real reason. And how the arcade can afford this many cabinets, several of the same game in the same location. Granted, there is lore that you can come across, and sometimes it does try to explain some of this. But if you try to think too deeply with this game, you're gonna have a lot more questions than answers. But the atmosphere is important to set up the tension, and using the flashlight and the limited light, you can get some of these moments where you get chills up your spine. Not jump scares, but actual tension. Specifically, when the game is being more subtle with these scares, they are a lot more effective. Like a shadow passing on the screen while focusing on the Janitor game. Or when you hear a noise behind you while playing the arcade game. Actually, a lot of the best scares happen when you're focused on the machine and you can actually miss them. And that makes sense. Keeping your attention on one thing, knowing full well there's a horror around you, and you'll be naturally up to the scare that the game is throwing at you. I just wish that the gameplay did a better job of complementing these moments. So as I mentioned, you'll be running from the entity, and a lot of the active gameplay will be you sneaking around the entity, trying to open up a new pathway without getting caught. At first it'll be simple, just hiding until he goes away, but other times you'll have to actively wait for sneaking around him, using an arcade game for example, and hoping he doesn't see you. See, when he sees you, that's when the game sort of falls apart. See, that's when the tension should be the highest, when you're panicking because you made a mistake, and the game should give you a chance to fix that moment while still punishing it. You know, hide, and find a new way of going about things, or die and learn from your mistakes. But no, in most cases that it happened to me, you pretty much won't be able to escape. In fact, it was easier to just let the death happen and reset at a checkpoint. And I'm not sure if that was purposeful. In fact, I'm pretty sure it wasn't. See, you may think you can hide under certain things when you're found and be able to get away, like in this clip. Well, he'll literally use his force powers to move you out of your hiding spot to kill you in such an unnatural way that you feel like the game screwed you, and sorta with an uneventful kill animation, especially in the days of jump scares and over-the-top sequences. Oh, and if you can't do that, he'll just keep on trying to get after you no matter what. You think he's gonna give up here, even though I'm out of his reach and can't be seen really? Nah, I literally stayed here for a good 2 minutes while it kept on running after me under the tables here. And I get it. It sorta makes sense that the entity knows that I'm there. I went under the table and he was able to see that. But what's the point in hiding if it's going to keep on coming after me here? It's one of the genre tropes that is necessary for a horror game like this. Yeah, it may not make sense, but it doesn't work otherwise. In fact, the AI as a whole has a pathfinding problem in certain areas. It'll get caught on machines and run in place, and you can maybe exploit that if your goal isn't anywhere towards where he is, but it leads to a major problem. When I don't feel like I can win a battle consistently against the enemy because of lacking information, and to the point where I'm just restarting to just not get seen, it empties the room of tension, and that's a death nail at times for this game. But in the same breath, there were areas that seemingly worked a lot better when it came to this, and even had the entity give up. So I don't know if it's just that it needed more time in the oven, and it could be fixed with the right information, but I'm going to be clear. The game otherwise wasn't pulling me in enough where I was really invested into trying to play around with it more. What will be a deciding factor is if you want to do the extras in the game, and go for what seems to be a good ending from a story perspective. Because yes, it's nice to see when your actions have rewards to them. There are collectibles in the game, and notes that may give some lore to the actual lack of story that's told here, but not a whole lot. Like, I found one teddy bear in an event, and the notes left by workers do a good job of providing some information about what happened, and what led to some of the problems in this location. But if you're expecting a lore to dive into like other games, I'm not sure Janitor Bleeds is really what you'll be looking for, at least from what I found. Like, I don't feel like I learned a whole lot about the events, even with what I found and the ending I got. And maybe it's because it's the type of information that I was hoping to discover. Like, what was the purpose of the entity? Is it part of some overall evil ritual? Or is it some evil force killing for basically the reason of it likes to? The game hints at a few things. It hints about the Janitor arcade as a whole, but nothing where I feel comfortable that anyone who did a lore video on this game would really have enough to go on. And given the emphasis on that nowadays, that seems like a missed opportunity. Now, that is with the caveat that I haven't gotten the great ending, or at least I hope there's a good ending, considering there are some achievements that indicate you get the high score in Janitor, and it seems to be of that structure. But it should say something that I didn't feel like playing through it and finding the rest of that information. It just didn't capture my attention. In the end, Janitor Bleeds will fulfill the hunger of those looking for an indie horror game to get a little bit of tension out of, to dive into, because that's your genre and this is more of it. You'll get a couple of hours of enjoyment out of it. But like a candy bar, you'll only be satisfied for a small amount of time. For those who aren't big horror fans, you aren't going to get anything unique here, as a lack of real substantial lore, an atmosphere that can be inconsistent at times, AI that's just a little bit off, and general gameplay that's nothing to write home about, will make this a title to only play in the right circumstances and for the right price. That's why the game earns a 60 out of 100, making it a sale buy for most players, but just barely. But that doesn't take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective element of games and matches the game to you. If you strongly fall into one of the following categories, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to figure out where the buyability range of this game falls for you. In this case, there's definitely a subgenre of player that may want to pick this up, especially those of the horror persuasion, but others will not find something that will change their mind about the genre here. And yes, this is a review that's a little bit shorter than most, and that's purposeful. When it comes to these horror games, at least from my perspective, the least you know about it, the better in terms of the mechanics, but an overall feeling of what the game gives you is important. Again, I don't want to spoil even the scares in certain cases, even though I need to talk about it and give you some of them, but for the big detail that you see in my other reviews, I don't think it's appropriate for this genre. As for what I'm going to review next, you can find that out and keep up to date with my indie game streams by joining the Discord, which is in the description below, where we have good discussions about video games and all things, and have surprise appearances of Vlad, everybody's favorite vampire. He's like an unofficial mascot. Like the video if you found the review useful, or dislike it if you didn't, and tell me what you think about the review or the game in the comments section below. Helps me become a better reviewer. But for now, I'll end this video, and as always, keep on gaming.